My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think.
A frantic late-night security alert at the Royal Archives has blown the lid off the monarchy's most explosive secret. Princess Anne, working through private, uncatalogued documents, reportedly caught the Queen in a desperate last-minute attempt to physically alter the late Queen Elizabeth II's final will. The document, which governs the distribution of the sovereign's massive private estate, was allegedly found with unauthorized, handwritten amendments. This discovery has ignited a firestorm within the inner circle, turning a routine archival review into a full-scale constitutional crisis that threatens to tear the royal family's remaining loyalties apart. The discovery in the vault. The air in the royal archives smelled of cold stone and decaying paper. Princess Anne clicked her flashlight on. The beam cut through the darkness of the subterranean vault. It landed on a mahogany chest pushed against the back wall. She walked over to it. The metal lock was rusted. She pulled a small key from her pocket. She had spent 2 hours trying to find it in the inventory logs. She turned the key. The lid creaked open. The facts are that the vault contains the most private records of Queen Elizabeth II. These documents are not meant to be accessed by any working royal without a full council of record keepers present. Anne was alone. She had bypassed the security check at the main gate using her emergency override code. She had come to the archive to trace the original deeds of the sovereign's private properties. She had not expected to find the final will of the late Queen in an unsecured chest. Tension gripped her as she began to lift the heavy, vellum-bound documents. She checked the dates. They were clearly marked. She found the folder labeled with the late Queen's personal seal. She opened it. She saw the familiar black ink of her mother's signature. She also saw something else. There were smears of blue ink over the third page. She held the paper up to the light. The original text had been crossed out. New words had been written in the margins. The mystery was who had added the notes. The handwriting was jagged. It was not the crisp, controlled script of the late Queen. It looked like someone had been trying to mimic the style in a hurry. The ink was still dark. It had not faded like the rest of the document. Someone had been in this chest very recently. The mystery resolved when Anne looked at the bottom of the page. A smudge of purple wax was caught in the corner of the vellum. She recognized the wax. It was from the seal used by the current Queen's personal correspondence desk. The evidence was right in front of her. The document had been tampered with while it was stored in the vault. The facts were that the altered sections specifically focused on the distribution of crown jewels. The new notes redirected significant holdings of the sovereign's private estate away from the main line of succession. These changes favored the children of the current Queen. If these amendments were allowed to stand, they would shift the balance of power within the monarchy's finances for the next 50 years. The document was a direct attack on the structure of the royal inheritance. A new mystery emerged when Anne checked the digital security log for the vault. She plugged her tablet into the wall terminal. The log showed that the vault had been accessed 3 times in the last 48 hours. Each time, the entry was cleared using the Queen's own high-level security clearance. She was not just moving files, she was actively rewriting the history of the house. Anne stood up. Her knees ached from the cold floor. She put the document back into the chest. She did not close the lid. She needed to take this evidence to the king immediately. She realized that she had stumbled onto the most explosive secret in the history of the family. The Queen was not just influencing the current reign. She was attempting to steal the legacy of the late sovereign. She walked toward the heavy steel door. She paused to listen. She heard footsteps echoing in the corridor above. She turned off her flashlight. She stepped back into the shadows of the shelves. She held her breath. She had to get out of the vault without being seen. If she was caught, the document would disappear and the truth would die with it. The footsteps moved past the vault door. They continued down the hall. Anne waited. She counted to 60. She reached for the door handle. She slipped into the hallway. The lights were dim. She walked toward the service exit. She was the only person in the house who knew about the blue ink. She was the only person who knew that the will had been broken. She reached the stairs. She climbed them quickly. The palace was quiet at this hour. The guards were at their posts. She walked past the security cameras with her head down. She was focused on one goal. She needed to reach the king's private study. She was going to show him the broken seal. The hallway to the study was empty. She pushed the door open. The king was sitting at his desk. He looked up. He was surprised to see her at this hour. He asked her what she was doing. She walked to his desk. She took the document out of her coat. She laid it flat on the desk. She pointed to the blue ink. The king stared at the page. He did not say a word. He knew the signature of his stepmother. He knew the style of the writing. He looked at Anne. He saw the cold anger in her eyes. He knew that the monarchy had just reached a point of no return. The battle for the will had officially begun. The handwritten amendments. The king leaned over his desk. He reached for his magnifying glass. He studied the blue ink for a long minute. The silence in the room felt heavy. He looked at the specific phrasing of the amendments. They did not just distribute money. They granted titles to the queen's grandchildren. They assigned private land deeds to her children. It was a complete teardown of the late queen's original intent. He pushed the paper toward the center of the desk. The facts are that the late Queen Elizabeth II had drafted the original will in 2016. She had done so with the guidance of the Privy Council. It was a precise legal instrument designed to protect the integrity of the sovereign's assets. The amendments discovered by Princess Anne were dated as recently as last month. They had been added without the presence of a witness or a legal notary. They were, by the laws of the realm, entirely invalid. Tension flared when the king asked Anne how she had managed to open the chest. He reminded her that the vault protocols were among the strictest in the house. She explained that she had used the override key that their mother had given her years ago. She had never used it until tonight. She told him that she knew something was wrong when she saw the security logs showing unauthorized activity. The king listened, but did not thank her. He was already thinking about the fallout. The facts were that the altered will was not just a legal error, it was a massive breach of trust. The queen had used her status to gain access to the archives. She had operated under the assumption that no one would dare to inspect the late monarch's records for decades. She had miscalculated the diligence of the other members of the family. The mystery was how the queen had obtained the original vellum. The archive vault required a dual-key system to open the inner chest. The king held one key. The head archivist held the other. The archivist had been retired for 10 years. Who had given the queen the second key? Someone in the house had been helping her to dismantle the archive system from the inside. The mystery resolved when Anne pointed to the security log. She noticed an entry for a late-night service call from a technician named Elias. He was the same man who had been seen near the generator room during the banquet crisis. He was not a palace employee. He was a locksmith who had been hired by the queen's office on a private contract. The king realized that the queen had been building her own support team for a long time. A new mystery emerged as the king checked his own keyring. He kept his vault key in a locked safe in his study. He opened the safe. He saw that the key was missing. He looked at the lock. It had not been forced. It had been opened with a professional tool. He realized that the queen had been in his private study while he was asleep. She had been stealing from him in his own home. The king stood up. He walked to the door. He told Anne that she was not to speak to anyone about this. He needed time to consult with the Duke of Kent. He needed to verify if any other documents had been removed from the archives. He told her to go back to the archive and lock the chest. She had to make it look like nothing had been disturbed. Anne did not agree. She told him that they could not leave the evidence in the vault. If the queen realized that she had been discovered, she would destroy the document. The king did not listen. He insisted that he needed to control the timeline of the reveal. He wanted to trap the queen in the act of further tampering. He wanted to catch her when she came back for the rest of the files. Anne turned to leave. She looked at the desk one more time. She knew that the king was being too cautious. She knew that the queen was smarter than he gave her credit for. She walked out of the study and headed back to the vaults. She felt the weight of the key in her pocket. She had a bad feeling about the king's plan. She entered the archive room. The air was still cold. She walked to the back vault. She looked at the chest. She reached for the lid to close it. She stopped. She looked closer at the interior of the chest. There was a faint scent of fresh ink. She realized that someone had added another page while she was gone. The queen was already back. She looked at the new page. It was a list of bank account numbers. They were the same accounts the Princess of Wales had been tracking in Switzerland. The queen was using the late monarch's name to finalize the transfer of the assets. She was doing it now. Anne pulled her phone out. She began to take photos of every single page. She needed the proof. She heard a sound at the door. It was the hum of the vault lock being engaged from the outside. She was being locked in. She turned the flashlight toward the door. She saw a shadow move across the floor. Someone was guarding the exit. She was trapped in the vault with the evidence. She had caught the queen, but she was now in the line of fire. She reached for the emergency alarm. It was dead. The power had been cut. She was in total darkness. She could hear the sound of someone breathing on the other side of the door. She realized that the queen had known she would return. The trap was not for the king. It was for her. The palace was at war with its own blood. The confrontation at the palace. Anne pressed her back against the cold stone of the archive wall. She held her phone tight. The screen glowed, illuminating her face in the dark. She was recording the sound of the breathing on the other side of the heavy door. It was rhythmic, it was calm. The person outside was not going to open the door. They were waiting for her to panic. She tapped the screen and sent a copy of the photos to the king's private address. She did not know if he would see them. She had to take the risk. The facts are that the palace security system operates on a segmented network. Each wing has its own independent override. By locking the vault, the intruder had severed the connection between the archive and the main house security. Anne was in a blind spot. She could not trigger an alert. She could not speak to the guards. She was effectively erased from the internal communication grid of the palace. Tension surged as she heard the distinct click of a digital terminal being plugged into the vault lock. Someone was trying to wipe the entry logs from the archive. If they succeeded, there would be no record of her being there. She stood up. She walked to the heavy shelving. She moved a stack of dusty ledger books. She saw a small manual release lever hidden behind the wood. She had seen it on a blueprint years ago. She hoped it still worked. The mystery was why the Queen's team was taking such a high risk to trap a princess. Killing a senior royal in the archives was not a strategy for success. It was an act of desperation. It meant that they were running out of time. The Queen had to have the final documents ready before the morning news cycle began. She was gambling everything on this night. The mystery resolved when Anne pulled the lever. The mechanism groaned. The vault door did not open all the way, but it popped the seal. A puff of stale air hit her face. She pushed against the heavy steel. It moved 2 inches. She squeezed through the gap. She was back in the corridor. The hallway was empty. The terminal was still hooked to the door. She kicked it to the floor and smashed it. The facts were that the intruder was long gone. They had seen the door move. They had retreated toward the service elevator. Anne did not chase them. She ran toward the main staircase. She had the proof. She had the photos. She was going to find the king. She was going to make sure the Queen could never return to the house. A new mystery emerged as she turned the corner. She saw 2 members of the king's personal guard standing by the study door. They looked at her. They did not bow. They did not acknowledge her status. They stepped into her path. They told her that the king was in a meeting. They said he was not to be disturbed by anyone, not even by her. Anne looked at them. She noticed they were not wearing their regular insignia. They were wearing pins she did not recognize. It was the mark of the Queen's private security detail. The king's own guards had been replaced. She realized that the coup was not just happening in the archives. It was happening in the king's office. She backed away slowly. She turned and ran down the stairs. She was not going to the study. She was going to the Queen's private apartments. If the king was compromised, she had to find the source of the order. She reached the door. She pushed it open. The room was bright. The Queen was sitting at her vanity. She was brushing her hair. She looked at Anne in the mirror. She was not surprised. The Queen smiled. She told Anne that she had been expecting her. She said it was a pity that she had escaped the vault. She told her that the king was currently occupied with a formal briefing. She had arranged it to keep him busy. She told Anne that she was disappointed. She had hoped to avoid this conversation until the morning. Anne stood by the door. She told her that she had the evidence. She held up her phone. She said the photos were already with the legal counsel. The Queen stood up. She walked toward Anne. She did not look worried. She told her that the counsel worked for the crown, and she was the crown. She said that the king's signature was the only thing that mattered, and he was currently signing whatever she put in front of him. The facts were that the Queen had spent the night systematically dismantling the remaining loyalists in the king's staff. She had used the chaos of the archive breach to consolidate her power. She had convinced the king that the security failures were the result of Anne's own rogue actions. The king believed that his sister was trying to destabilize the house. He had ordered her to be removed from the grounds. Anne felt the blood leave her face. She realized the trap was perfect. The Queen had not just captured her. She had turned the king against her. She was being framed as the enemy of the house. She had to get out of the room. She had to reach the Princess of Wales. She was the only person who would believe her. The Queen signaled to the guards at the door. They stepped inside. They reached for Anne. She fought them. She was not going to go quietly. She used the lessons she had learned in the royal training sessions. She broke free. She ran through the door. She sprinted down the hall. She needed to get to the transport bay. She needed a car. She needed a way out of the palace. The halls were silent. The lights were bright. She was a runner in a trap. She saw a window leading to the terrace. She climbed out. The rain was heavy. The cold air hit her lungs. She jumped. She landed on the grass. She did not stop. She ran for the perimeter fence. The palace was not her home anymore. It was her battlefield. She was the only one left to save the legacy. Legal consequences of tampering. Anne reached the perimeter fence. She climbed the gate. Her coat caught on the wire. She ripped it free. She dropped to the pavement on the other side. A dark sedan was idling in the shadows. It was the Princess of Wales's personal transport. The door opened. Catherine sat inside. She looked at Anne's torn coat. She did not ask what had happened. She told the driver to pull away. The palace gates receded into the distance. The facts are that tampering with a sovereign's will is a grave offense. It is not a civil dispute. It falls under the category of treasonous interference with the crown. The document Anne found was legally binding until the moment the ink was altered. By changing the terms, the Queen had essentially nullified her own rights to the estate. The King's legal team was now preparing to file an emergency injunction to seize all records from the Queen's private office. Tension filled the car. Anne explained the trap in the vault. She showed Catherine the photos on her phone. Catherine zoomed in on the signature. She noted the slight tremor in the line. She told Anne that the handwriting was a clumsy attempt at forgery. It was the work of someone who was panicking. They were not looking at a master plan. They were looking at a collapse of judgment. The mystery was how the king would react when he realized his own security had been compromised. He was currently sequestered in his office. He was surrounded by guards he did not know. He had to be liberated. Catherine turned to Anne. She asked if she still had the override code. Anne shook her head. The code had been changed while she was in the vault. The mystery resolved when Catherine pulled a small silver device from her handbag. It was a signal jammer. She told Anne that she had anticipated the security purge. She had prepared a countermeasure to disable the local palace network. If they could get back to the perimeter, they could cut the communications to the Queen's guards. They could force the palace to reboot its security protocols. The facts were that they were headed to the office of the Chief Justice. He was the only person who could legally override the King's current security status. He had been a loyal friend to the late Queen. He would know what to do with the photographic evidence. The Princess of Wales was taking the fight out of the house. She was moving it into the highest court of the land. A new mystery opened as they approached the city center. A blockade of police cars was parked across the main bridge. A government official was standing by the lead vehicle. He was holding a document. It was a detention order. It was signed with the King's royal seal. They were being stopped by the very law they were trying to uphold. Catherine told the driver to stop. She opened the door. The air was cold and damp. She walked toward the official. She recognized the man. He was a junior minister who had been promoted by the Queen just 2 weeks ago. He was the one who had written the detention order. He looked nervous. He was holding the paper with both hands. He told Catherine that she was under investigation for conspiring against the crown. He claimed that the king had personally issued the warrant. Catherine did not flinch. She asked him if he had actually spoken to the king. She asked him if he had seen the king sign the paper. The minister hesitated. He looked at the police officers behind him. They were waiting for his signal. Catherine took a step forward. She told him that the warrant was a forgery. She explained that she had been with the king earlier that day. She knew his official seal had been locked away in the safe. She demanded to see the signature stamp. The minister did not know what to say. He looked at the paper again. The seal was slightly off-center. The facts were that the Queen had issued the warrant herself. She had used the king's digital signature. She was trying to arrest the only people who knew the truth. It was a desperate move. She was overplaying her hand. The police began to lower their weapons. They were confused. They did not want to be involved in a family war. The princess reached out and took the warrant from his hand. She tore it in half. She told the officers to stand down. She said the monarchy was under siege from a traitor. She told them they were witnesses to an illegal arrest. The minister backed away. He retreated to his car. He drove off. The blockade broke. The road was open. The car moved forward. Catherine looked at Anne. They were safe for now. The queen had failed to stop them. The evidence was still in their hands. They were going to the judge. They were going to end the power of the queen. They were going to save the king from his own house. The city was quiet. The sun was starting to rise over the skyline. The palace was behind them. The war was in the streets now. The queen had made her move. She had forced the hand of the state. She had shown the world her true intentions. The mask was gone. The monarchy was finally fighting back. Anne felt the exhaustion take over. She looked at the photos on her phone. She felt a sense of peace. She had done her part. The truth was out. The law would take over now. She closed her eyes. She leaned back against the seat. She was done with the palace. She was ready for the morning to come. The fallout among the queen's children. The private farm in Gloucestershire was shrouded in morning mist. It was a sprawling estate hidden by dense rows of oak trees. 3 black cars were parked in the gravel drive. A group of men in dark suits stood near the front porch. They were waiting. They were not smiling. One of the queen's children, Prince Edward, stepped out onto the porch. He was holding a tablet. He looked at the men. He asked if the courier had arrived from the palace. The lead man shook his head. The facts are that the queen's children had been instructed to remain at this location until the legal dust settled at the palace. They had been told that their mother was finalizing a massive transfer of assets that would secure their financial independence for a generation. They had no idea that the plan had been discovered. They believed they were waiting for the final documents to be signed. They were ready to claim their share of the late queen's private wealth. Tension built as Prince Edward walked to the car. He checked his phone. He had received a message from his mother's office. It was a simple one-line instruction. It said to be ready for an emergency transport at 8 in the morning. It did not give a reason. It did not explain the delay. He looked at his sister, who was standing by the second car. She looked worried. They were starting to realize that something had gone wrong. The mystery was why the local security detail had suddenly changed. The men who usually patrolled the estate were gone. They had been replaced by a group of private contractors. They did not have the royal insignia on their uniforms. They did not answer to the estate manager. They stood guard at the perimeter with their hands on their belts. They were watching the children. The mystery resolved when Edward walked up to one of the guards. He demanded to know who had hired them. The guard did not look at him. He simply said that he was under orders from the office of the Chief Justice. The children froze. The Chief Justice was the one person who could stop their mother. They realized that the palace was not winning the battle. They were being held under observation. The facts were that the children had no legal standing to challenge the guards. They were effectively under house arrest. Their phones had been restricted. They could only send messages to a specific monitored portal. They were being cut off from the outside world. The Queen's plan to isolate them had turned into a prison. They were the first victims of the fallout. A new mystery emerged when a helicopter appeared in the sky above the trees. It was not the Queen's transport. It was a police aviation unit. It circled the estate twice. It descended toward the main lawn. A team of investigators stepped out. They were carrying bags of evidence. They were not coming for a visit. They were coming for an interview. Edward walked to the center of the lawn. He signaled to his sister. She joined him. They were the only two present who knew about the original will. They knew that their mother had been trying to rewrite the history of the house. They did not know that the evidence had already reached the king's office. They thought the investigators were there for a routine check of the estate accounts. The lead investigator walked up to them. He did not introduce himself. He held up a copy of the amended will. He asked Edward if he recognized the handwriting. Edward looked at the paper. He saw the blue ink. He saw the signatures. He looked at his sister. He knew the game was over. The investigators were not there for a check. They were there for a confession. The children did not speak. They looked at the house. They realized their mother had used them. She had put their names on the amendments to make the changes look legitimate. She had made them accomplices to a crime they did not understand. They were going to be the ones who paid the price. They were going to lose everything. The investigator opened his bag. He took out 2 sets of papers. He told them they were under caution. He explained that any statement they made could be used in a court of law. The reality hit them. The monarchy was not going to protect them. The palace was going to discard them to save its own reputation. Edward looked at the guards. They were stepping closer. He realized there was no escape. The estate was locked down. The cars were blocked. He looked at his sister. She was crying. He took her hand. He told her to be strong. The investigators began their work. They started with the details of the bank accounts in Switzerland. The morning sun hit the trees. The farm was no longer a place of safety. It was a crime scene. The Queen's children stood in the grass. They were the last line of defense for a plan that had already failed. The palace was moving on. They were being left behind. The house was changing. The old order was falling apart. The investigators finished their first set of questions. They waited for an answer. Edward looked at the tablet in his hand. He deleted the last message from his mother. He knew she was not coming for them. She was gone. He looked at the investigator. He opened his mouth to speak. He had nothing left to lose. He told them everything he knew. The Princess of Wales takes control. Catherine stood in the center of the archive vault. The air was heavy with the smell of old parchment and dust. She held a heavy brass key in her hand. It was the master key to the royal records. She looked at the chest where the original will had been hidden. It was now sitting empty. She had ordered it to be moved to her private office 2 hours ago. She did not want to leave anything to chance. The facts are that Catherine had acted with total authority. She had bypassed the king's hesitation. She had mobilized her own team of loyalists within the staff to secure every single historical document in the wing. She had issued a blanket order to freeze all access to the underground levels. No one, not even the royal secretaries, was allowed past the security checkpoint without her personal clearance. She was physically manifesting the new power structure of the house. Tension filled the small room. As she noticed a loose floorboard near the back of the vault, she knelt down. She pried it open with a small tool. She found a leather-bound journal. She opened it. It was the record of the Queen's secret meetings. It was a list of every staff member the Queen had bribed over the last 3 years. Catherine felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The depth of the betrayal was even worse than she had suspected. The mystery was why the Queen had left the journal behind. It was too valuable to be abandoned. Catherine realized that the Queen hadn't left it by accident. She had hidden it here to be found. It was a list of names. It was a list of people who were all tied to the Queen's illegal schemes. It was a weapon of mass destruction aimed at the heart of the palace. The mystery resolved when Catherine saw a note tucked into the back of the journal. It was written in the Queen's own hand. It said that if the journal was found, it meant the end of the house. It was a warning. The Queen was telling her that if the truth came out, everyone would fall together. She was daring Catherine to publish the names. She was daring her to destroy the institution to save it. The facts were that the list included members of the Privy Council and senior officials in the government. If Catherine exposed them, the entire machinery of the monarchy would be paralyzed. The government would lose its leadership. The palace would lose its staff. She was holding a fuse. She could light it and watch the whole system burn, or she could use it to keep the remaining people in line. A new mystery emerged when Catherine heard a soft sound. It was the hum of a ventilation fan. She looked up. She noticed a small black camera mounted on the ceiling. It was not a standard palace unit. It was a high-resolution recording device. She realized she had been watched while she found the journal. The Queen had seen her find the names. She was being manipulated. Catherine walked to the camera. She did not look at it. She stayed calm. She knew the Queen was likely watching the feed from her own office. She looked at the journal. She held it up to the camera. She gave a small nod. She was telling the Queen that she understood the rules of the new game. She was not going to be intimidated. She was going to use the information. She tucked the journal into her bag. She stood up. She walked out of the vault. She signaled to her guards at the door. She told them to seal the vault with an electronic lock that only she could open. She walked toward the elevator. She had to find the king. She had to show him the names. She had to explain why they had to be very careful. The hallway was quiet. She felt the weight of the book in her bag. It was the key to everything. She knew the names. She knew who she could trust. She had to be precise. One wrong move would be a disaster. She reached the king's private study. She walked inside without waiting for an invitation. The king was standing by the window. He looked exhausted. He looked at Catherine. She laid the journal on his desk. She opened it to the first page. She watched his face as he scanned the list. She saw the shock. She saw the realization. She told him that they were no longer looking for a thief. They were looking for a silent coup. The king looked at the camera in the corner of the room. He walked over to it. He pulled it from the wall. He threw it on the floor. He shattered it with his boot. He turned to Catherine. He thanked her for the journal. He told her that he was ready to do whatever was necessary to clean the house. The palace was quiet. The war was in the documents. The war was in the names. The queen was in her rooms, waiting for the news to break. She was waiting for the list to destroy them, but she did not know that Catherine was already moving. The Princess of Wales was now the one who held the power. She was the one who was defining the end of the era. The night was nearly over. The sun was rising. The list was safe. The king and the princess stood together in the study. They were ready for the morning. They were ready for the confrontation. They were the ones who would lead the monarchy into the new day. The house was at peace, but the storm was just beginning. The legacy would be saved. The truth was out. The discovery of the hidden journal has shifted the balance of power entirely. With the Queen's secret network of allies exposed and the evidence of her forgery in the hands of the Princess of Wales, the monarchy faces its most dangerous hour. Princess Anne's narrow escape and the subsequent lockdown of the archives mark the beginning of a brutal legal reckoning. As the king and Catherine prepare to purge the treacherous elements from within their own walls, the Queen's carefully constructed plan is collapsing. Will they choose to expose the truth and risk chaos?